That Dr. Kalkinen's style of introduction was almost worth it alone. So I'm going to read today from, this is my debut short story collection. It's called Judgment Day and Other White Lies. This is a very trimmed down version of it, but it's a version of my thesis that I wrote when I was a graduate student here. Turned it in 2017 and then spent a couple of years editing it some more, and it came out in February. These are retellings of Greek and Christian myth. They're sort of, it's called Judgment Day and Other White Lies. They're aimed at sort of deconstructing this idea of Western civilization, in particular sort of whiteness and white supremacy, but I talk about capitalism, patriarchy, all those sort of big systems that sort of interact with our stories. And as Dr. Kalkinen mentions, there's stories that are aware of being stories, they're metafictions. And so I'm interested in that process of how do we create propaganda, how is our reality dictated by the stories we tell each other about each other, and so and also just in what stake do white people also have in dismantling white supremacy. As you'll see in these stories, that the element of privilege is not one. It's a corrosive element to the white characters as well. So in any case, I'm going to start with this is a microfiction called The Bell Witch Hunter and the Curse of Jacksonian History. It's based on a real sort of folk tale about Andrew Jackson before he was president. There's this farm in Tennessee called Bell Farm that was haunted by what they believed was the ghost of a witch. And Andrew Jackson said, well, I'm going to go down there and unhaunt that farm. There's a lot of different versions of it, and people sort of take liberties with it and have fun with it. And so I did that myself. So in any case, this is called The Bell Witch Hunter and the Curse of Jacksonian History. I no longer believe in history. Antiquity was remade from scratch in the 1820s when Andrew Jackson commissioned the Great Global Project. Enlisted his Masonic brethren, formed an elite conspiracy with populist dens. You see, sounds crazy, but like for real, the first verifiable event happened on John Bell's farm in Tennessee. Bell had been sighting ghost animals down the barrel of his musket, shots moving through apparitions without resistance, without blood, ghost dog in the cornfields, ghost turkey on a fence post, ghost horse at the haystack, ghost dog again, this time by the creek. Eventually, even weirder things happen. Bell finds he can't speak on certain days, tongue swollen not in a medical way, but like a ghost cat had it. On uncertain days, polyphonic voices, all call themselves Kate, come out of the walls and light fixtures in his otherwise quaint home, different pitches and intonations and accents, arguing and contradicting. Bell gets spooked enough to ask for help. Word spreads across the state to Jackson, who is not yet president but already a proud veteran, not scared of anything, says he'll defeat the ghost, put the fear of God into Kate, that witch. Heads out to Bell Farm where he stayed overnight, said later, rather fight an army of the savagest savages, his words, not mine, than spend one more night in that creepy old farm. But he also wants accolades, loves accolades, they're the greatest. Keeps mulling the problem over, figures ghosts are traumas, and traumas are inflicted by men who make history, and sadist that Jackson was, he enjoys inflicting trauma almost as much as he enjoys receiving accolades. Figures he can solve Bell's problem by creating productive new problems. His people would love him for it. Decides he's going to rewrite history like all of it, cut the witch out with scissors and white out the rest. Concept wasn't exactly a new one. Most powerful kings attempted at least once, at least according to Andrew Jackson they did. Because you see, he plans an agenda, hires his own staff of writers, they put all new words under all the old titles, use aged paper, wear the book bindings down, replace them on the shelves. For instance, the Metamorphoses, on the revolution of the celestial spheres, the Kabbalah, Hamlet, and so on and on and on. Clandestine style. Historians start quoting, soon bogus copies become fixed reality. I could continue, but I don't even know how deep it goes. He canonized white as a blinding light, chased a manifested destiny. You see, a few months after Jackson departed, John Bell swallowed a whole bottle of poison. Family said Kate made him do it. Jackson claimed the witch was dead. The people called him a ding-dong. And when the church bells rang out in funereal songs, he said, exceptionalism trumps repetition, while pallbearers loaded the wooden coffin ever so shakily into the horse-drawn carriage. Excuse me. All right, this next story is the first part of a story called The Ball Game at Xibalba. So Xibalba is based on this Mayan myth. It's about this ball game that they play sort of outside the gates of hell, or their version of hell, I guess, their underworld. But it's really more so as you'll see, there's a lot of like sort of characters with Greek and Roman names playing on this ball court, these street ball characters. It's really sort of more about how do we sort of reread these European myths on top of these indigenous myths. This is also sort of an absurdist version of a Cormac McCarthy Western, or my version anyways. So, you know, I play around with form a lot in this collection. This story is one that doesn't have any quotation marks in sort of that Cormac McCarthy style. It's sort of because it's about borders and boundaries and sort of how we invade those. And so it takes place at this, it's also based on a sort of Hunter Thompson quote, which is about Houston, my hometown, being a land of pansexual cowboys and oil tycoons. And so it's based on this basketball tournament. This guy named Tex Randall, who runs a drilling company, is running at his mansion in River Oaks, sort of the richest neighborhood in Houston. And he's sort of pitting these desperate sort of street ball players to play in this game for him by paying them, you know, not really quite enough money to compete for a prize that doesn't really end up being a prize. So I'm not going to give that part away. But in any case, this is the first part of that story. After the clock for placing final bets on the game ticked down to 0, the crowd shuffled away from the ticket window and to their seats. The referee sounded his whistle, gathered the players at half court in a circular formation around the girth of his pale flesh. His waxed bald head reflected the underground arena lights from the aerial view. He held the ball toward the rafters, in the basement of Gibalba, oil tycoon Tex Randall's mansion in River Oaks, Houston, Texas. The underground square footage cost 3 times as much as the rest of the oversized house because of built-in supports to stabilize the structure from shifting clay soil and aquifer. Essentially, it wasn't an ideal environment for a basketball tournament, which was why Tex liked it so much. The referee looked first at the rookie, then at Big Daddy, then back up at the ball, brought it down to his naked waist, bounced it off the court with both hands, picked it up, held it above his head again, turned his chin upward, took a deep breath, then paused to give the crowd a chance to frame the moment against the spotlighted onyx walls before tossing up the rock to signal the start of the first half. The rookie leapt and touched the ball first, Big Daddy too pensive. The naked referee with the whistle standing under him was too much an image outside the scope of his normal routine. He never even left his feet. It wasn't exactly the fiercest start to the battle of wills that the order had hoped for, especially not with all the money they had paid Big Daddy to play, and especially considering the bonus opportunity should he win MVP, which he was the pregame favorite for. The tip went to Hermes 2K, legendary point guard from the N1 mixtape. His street ball finesse a spectacle on YouTube, prolific passer. Real fans remembered him as a well-known commodity going all the way back to his All-American days in high school, when he looked like a grown man playing with children, destined for the big show. Too bad a hazing scandal involving his frat lost him a scholarship to Duke only the first month into his freshman season. He never made it back onto any college team. The pros didn't deem his talent worthy of the risk. Now, like everyone else on the court, he had a chance at a second chance. He dribbled the rock past the Thanatos Bits half-court logo, Texas Drilling Company, went to the top of the key, dropped a pass down into the paint where the rookie had posted up on Big Daddy. Kid took 2 dribbles as he backed the grizzled veteran toward the rim, then faked a spin to his right and went left. Took the rock unguarded the rest of the way to the hole. Big Daddy cursed himself as the rookie put 2 on the board. Wasn't expecting that kind of strength. The crowd oohed at the slam dunk. The kid, a real-life American Eagle when he took flight with the egg of destiny in his hands. But then as he made his way up the court to get back on defense, the morphed into ridiculing murmurs. He was still new to the circuit. Couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old. Everyone wondered what he was doing here with this group of has-beens. Still, the rookie didn't look like how a star talent was supposed to look either. He was as awkward when he ran as he was graceful in the air. His undersized frame not yet matching his big feet and big hips. His long neck colluding with gravity to make his head bobble like a plastic collector's item. Not to mention the pink and green workout attire, or the expression on his face, the way he lowered his eyebrows when he smiled, in a trying to belong by not looking too much like I'm trying to belong kind of a way. Maybe it was this very performative naivety that made his game so captivating, the way it confounded expectations. In the end, made him a featured player at this final game of the tournament. Made him second in the odds for the Golden Dagger, for MVP, at this main event for the Order, who paid the utmost homage to the big man game. The power of the throwback, as Tex, the founder, liked to say. They saw their tournament as the embrace of a budding religious tradition, formed in the restructuring of the rules of an arbitrary but classical game. Their own version and antithesis to the pro game, where the post-up had been voided of its magic by progressive analytics, corresponding to a favoring of finesse over strength, an aesthetic fundamentally opposed to their own moral framework. Strength determined authority, which determined the sacred, thus making strength the primary mode of being for true playing of the game. The days of calculating the efficiency of methods were numbered, played out. It was time to return to a purer form of competition. And so the players behind the players, the members of the order who played the truly consequential games, who belonged to a timeless class of men with the literal job of building an omnipotent and homogeneous culture based entirely on power. The world depended on their success to frame power as understandable for the masses, how they saw it anyway. Their newest task was to take the faux divination of modern-day fanatics and turn it into a moral and spiritual framework that could hold the proper level of tension in a battle between two giants. Thus, they paired the two strongest street ball big men currently playing on the national circuit, the rookie and Big Daddy, against each other in the game inside of the game. The centers extraordinaire, the old school inspiring the new school, winner take all, provided he be prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice, to do anything to win. The rookie bumbled to his spot. There was something familiar about his failings, or maybe it was his face. Big Daddy shook his head, tried to get the cobwebs out, or maybe it was something in the rookie that had shaken his entire being, had made him remember his early years. He didn't want those mentally trying times to come back any more than he wanted to suffer these physically trying ones. He looked away, saw his teammate Ajax, his second in command, his power forward, together as a front court. They called themselves the Titans of the Paint. The two men both hovering around 7 feet, Ajax the dirty work guy, Big Daddy the stat sheet filler. He told Ajax to take the ball out. Ajax did as he was told and tossed it into Lulu Cypher, their point guard, who ran up the court and shot a quick mid-range jumper at the elbow just seconds into the shot clock, bricked it off the rim. The ball kicked into the stands. It was caught by a former president there in attendance with his wife. He looked at her and smiled as if to say, "I'm proud of you even if no one else is, if for nothing more than being one of the very few women allowed into the room." The former first lady stared at the rookie. Something in his trying too hard must have produced some kernel of truth inside of her. The elder statesman smiled at her, thought she'd show them one day. She'd already shown him. He tossed the ball back in with a little extra oomph on it, heard the crowd clap behind him. He sighed, was looking forward to a vacation from all the appearances after 4 straight decades of campaigning. But it seemed like no matter where you went, still no way to ever shake the expectations of a crowd. The referee caught the president's pass on the third bounce. Big Daddy gave a look of disapproval, not at the president's impotent throw, but at the betrayal of Lulu, his teammate, at the reckless offense. If they were going to win the grand old prize, he'd have to do it on his own, show the rookie why old tricks trump new talent. The referee held the ball again, stood naked for all to see, rubbed his belly like an Eastern deity. The crowd all giggled, as if he had a visionary magic that went beyond just being able to call the games, that allowed him to exert actual intentional force on the dialectic between the home team and the visitors. He handed the ball off to Achilles, who had earned his name from the injury that saw him drop from Charlotte's G League team, the furthest he'd ever made it toward the big dance. He tossed it back into Hermes 2K, who drove into the paint for a layup and was met at the rim by the firm swat of Big Daddy's gargantuan hand. The current president pumped an approving fist toward the veteran from his courtside seats. "That's my guy," he said to his daughter, his date for the evening, held out his own hand. "What do you think?" She said, "Oh yes, Daddy, yes. You have the biggest hands, you do. You're my Big Daddy." When the ball bounced again at half court, Big Daddy scooped it up, dug deep, charged the length of the floor in only 5 fluid steps, beat everyone else and dunked it in on the other end. At the Stygian fountain, which the order saw as the perfect symbol of movement between the multiple flows and the singular source to which they all returned, Steve Bannon stood talking to Mohammed bin Salman. "Looks like you still got it to me. You sure you want to do this?" The Saudi king nodded and offered a hand holding a wad of dollar bills. Bannon met it with another wad, took the whole thing and wrapped a rubber band around it, passed it off to Emmanuel Macron for safekeeping, the prime minister holding Bannon's hand just a little longer than was comfortable. The Saudi chuckled and said, "Sucker." Bannon puffed out the lapels on his wrinkled suit jacket. "We'll see," he said. Then the two men, respecting the betting ritual, each took one of the order's golden coins from the bowl on the platform, marking the boundary for the fountain, kissed it, and tossed it into the wine-dark waters before all 3 men returned to the stands. Big Daddy saw them walking from his periphery, tracked Bannon back to his seat during a timeout after a foul call on Achilles. Felt the urge to punch someone. That is, until he saw a guy sitting behind Bannon wearing an alien mask, almost too realistic. Maybe just a lizard mask? A lizard man? Like those InfoWars wackos, or non-wackos, right about on the internet? Wasn't that just supposed to be anti-Semitic posturing? His urge for violence toward his oppressors subsided in a new kind of confusion. He felt like giving up. Big Daddy didn't know what to believe anymore. His new experience is constantly proving counter to his lived experience, eroding any sense of trust he'd ever had and any sense of rightness in the world. It was all too much. This crazy fucking place, this crazy fucking game. He didn't know why he had agreed to it, or he knew exactly why, but he wasn't sure if his initial reasoning had been sound. Shit. Basketball was already a crazy enough game to begin with. How you worried about the constant risk of injury, the uncouth characters who showed up to the parks from the neighborhoods where he usually played, the constant searching for scouts among their ranks, hoping to impress on the right day, but here, in one of the richest places in Texas, surrounded by eccentric, power-hungry CEOs and politicians, and maybe even literal aliens, he had to ask himself if it had ever been worth it, and if he even still had it. Was he losing it? And did the pronoun refer to his mind or his destiny, and was there a difference between the two? This strange legacy of athletics he'd been called into, where the body could be acted with and acted upon at the same time, both giver and receiver, dominant and dominated, where the body was most fallible and temporary, where no spirit could be found to carry him over to the abstract imaginary space he so needed to reach, and yet there was simultaneously a contradictory sense that he had always been stuck inside a fantasy. Right, we got one more for y'all. So this is the first three sections. It's really sort of the primary setup to the title story of the collection, Judgment Day. So just real quick setup for you. So in my version of Judgment Day, I'm playing around with the sort of traditional idea of apocalypse, right? In that Greek sense, it's the Greek word apocalyptine is originally to uncover or reveal. So there's always a sense of sort of, like Dr. Kalkin was saying as an introduction, right? Like what gets built after things get swept away, right? And so there's a hallucinogenic plant. It's named after Judgment Day, and these people smoke it, and they have what are called born-again experiences. And so this is sort of the setup for that. In my version, this guy smokes this plant. He wakes up as he's got a set of memories in his head that don't belong there to somebody else, but he still remembers being that person and the person in the body that he's in. And these two people are sort of these diametrically opposed sort of archetypes of whiteness. So you have this one that's a slacker character who tends bar and does a lot of drugs and sort of just has dropped out of, decided he doesn't like society, he's just going to drop out. And then you have this other guy who's like this real estate agent who's highly ambitious and is on Fortune magazine's top 100 most profitable businesses in the country, and he's sort of not satisfied with his life, even though he's sort of had everything that's he's ever wanted has been given to him. So you have these two sort of stories that we get told all the time, sort of colluding in the same body and seeing what kind of tragic fallout happens. So I'm just going to give you the setup here. So hopefully it'll pique your interest enough that you'll want to get the book. So, all right. So this is called Judgment Day. So the actor playing Seymour hit the note, and one more thing. This is set in Houston, so if you're from Houston, and there's a lot of people at this school sort of around that area, you'll probably notice some locations in this little section here. So the actor playing Seymour hit the note an octave too high, hiccuped, and then stopped. He looked out from the center stage at the Miller Outdoor Theater, through the small auditorium, and up the expansive grass hill. The shadow figures behind the spotlight parted like the Red Sea. Families grabbed their ice-chested blankets, packed up, scattered across the hill. Seymour held a hand to his eyes. The band stopped playing, the special effects audio cut out. Audrey II, the plant, unzipped and opened. A sweaty man stepped out of the costume, which had proven even mustier than usual on an early spring night in Houston, where a Texas-sized summer could already be felt invading the borders, causing the more temperate season a crisis of identity. The puppeteer wiped his forehead with a bandana he'd pulled from the front pocket of his overalls, walked up next to Seymour and said, "What the fuck is going on out there?" The house lights went up. A naked man alone on top of the hill. The people who'd paid for tickets in the seated area began to stand up and turn around, wanted to see what all the fuss was about. They wondered if they'd be getting a refund or not. Those sitting for free on the hill behind them had other worries. After a long, pseudo-religious rant while stripping down, the naked man put his arms akimbo and went silent, a veneration to his own disruption. The crowd took one slow step backward at a time, a plodding recession away from his psychotically breaking center. He was macroatomic, a radioactive half-life verging ever closer to toxic instability. He started ranting again. "Come here, I will show you the judgment on the great harlot who lives near the many waters. The kings of the earth have had intercourse with her, and the inhabitants of the earth became drunk on the wine of her harlotry." He stared straight ahead at the stage, kept one hand extended toward the sky, brought the other down to his crotch. The actress playing Audrey stepped behind Seymour, as if the naked man were staring specifically at her. He began to masturbate furiously, shouting at the tops of his lungs, "Do you see the whore of Babylon? Do you see the whore of Babylon?" A few men approached. The leader of the group yelled out, "Hey buddy, stop that mess and put some pants on, there's kids here." The naked man either didn't hear them or didn't care. He continued to stare straight ahead, kept on pumping his hand at his penis, yelling intermittently. The mothers shielded their children's eyes, well, those children who hadn't already been whisked away to the parking lot. When all these parents had told their kids they'd be taking them to see the Little Shop of Horrors, they hadn't meant it in any sort of a literal way. One of the men who'd approached the naked man now kicked him in the knee. The naked man didn't cry out. He only fell down. They descended upon him, beating him with their fists until they were tired. By the time the officers who were stationed in the park had walked the winding path and had made it all the way back up the steep hill, the men had him tied up in a blanket, serving as both restraint and covering. The officers asked what happened. The naked man spoke before anyone else could. "In her was found the blood of prophets and holy ones and all who have been slain on the earth." His face was bruised, his lips split. He drew a combination of saliva and blood. One of the cops looked at the group of men sternly. The leader said, "There's kids here." The cop didn't respond. He looked at the other cop and said, "Guy's not in his right mind. We should take him down to West Oaks, let them deal with it. Be less paperwork anyway." His partner said, "Looks pretty beat up to me. Maybe we should take him to a real hospital?" First cop said, "It ain't that bad. They got ice packs at West Oaks." He got down on his knee, pulled a pair of latex gloves from his breast pocket, and put them on. Flipped the man over, then put his knee to the naked man's back and began untangling him from the blanket. His partner put on his own set of gloves, reached down and handcuffed him. Then the first cop pushed the button on his walkie and spoke into his shoulder. "Yeah, we got us a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs situation down at Miller Outdoor Theater. Gonna need to take a perp into West Oaks. Might be a little late to change over." All right, this next section, just so you, this is told in dialogue. It's another one of those sort of metafictional forms. So if I'm switching back and forth between voices, just kind of know that's what's going on. There's two people talking. There's no tags in it. So it says, "Jesus, how many times do I need to go through this? You don't need to do anything, but you came to me for help, and I can't help you if I don't know what's going on. But I've told you already. There's details that need ironing out." Okay, whatever. So Titus and I were closing the bar at Griff's together that night. It was quiet for a Saturday. No crowd of barely legals chugging down their last pitcher. The regulars weren't as drunk as regularly. We got out of there pretty quick, by like 3 a.m. at the latest. When we were locking up the gate, Titus asked me if I wanted to come to his place to smoke a joint. I said sure. So we get back there. There's all these like golden lamps and pentagram posters and this statue of a lamb with spears sticking out of it. I asked him what was up with the new decor. He tells me it's his apocalypse trip spot. Then he tells me he doesn't have a joint. I laughed like he was bullshitting me. He never didn't have a joint. He laughed too, said, okay, you got me. I've got a joint, but I've also got this. He dangled it in front of my face. I asked him, is that what I think it is? It was. Judgment Day. JD, the holy fucking grail. Strongest hallucinogen known to man. A gram of baby blue powder staring me down from the other side of a translucent baggie. A whole other universe peeking through a rip in the space-time continuum. I couldn't believe it was really there. I couldn't believe it was really even real. What'd you call it? Judgment Day? Don't think I've heard of it. Shit's rare, almost mythical. Can only be extracted from one plant, the Lupinus deum. Grows in just one valley in all of the Andes. The locals call it the Garden of the Forking Path. Say Borges named his story after it. Borges? You never heard of Borges? What kind of a psychologist are you? He writes all these mindfuck stories, will twist your head up in knots, like an MC Escher painting or something. Doesn't ring a bell, but go on. Okay, but weird. So anyway, Borges used to make tea out of the leaves of the Lupinus deum and drink it in the morning before he wrote. They said it was where he got all those crazy ideas from. What we got was stronger than that. The shaman there had been boiling those leaves down into a paste for centuries, making this extract that can be ingested or smoked. And when you do, well, it's not so much that you have crazy ideas anymore, but that you realize how your very existence is nothing more than a crazy idea. If that makes any sense at all. Anyway, we had an ear to the ground for JD for quite some time, maybe even a decade even. Been on some kind of Don Quixote-esque quest for this stuff, nothing doing. I thought it was all the product of stoner lore. The JD was just some imagined symbol for the highest of highs, but I seriously doubted we'd ever find the stuff. Titus was obsessed with it, though. He used to spend half his free time reading stories on the internet from people who said they'd tried it. He asked random people in bars if they'd ever heard of it, usually to no avail. And even when they'd heard of it, it'd just be people like us who knew the legends but had never seen the evidence. Still, I wasn't exactly surprised when Titus turned up with it either. And then we weren't exactly tilting at windmills anymore. I asked Titus where he got it from. He said it just fell into his lap. I asked if he planned on smoking it right then and there. He said, shit, I ain't gotta wake up early tomorrow, do you? I tried to mentally prepare myself. There were urban legends about people feeling like entirely different people after they smoked it, coming back fundamentally changed. Which brings us back to right here and now. Just tell it to me like you're Stevie. Tell me what else you remember. Well, it could have been a dream. Sure, we've covered that possibility, but what it was is not what's important right now. I'm just trying to get you to see something else. Will you just humor me? Okay. So Titus looks at me and says, I don't want to ruin anything, but be ready to lose your fucking mind. Anyway, seemed like he'd already tried it. Kind of pissed me off. Why did it piss you off? Because when I asked him about it, he told me acid was the kiddie ride at the amusement park compared to JD. And then when I asked him how he knew that, he said he and Rebecca had done some a couple of nights before when I was working the bar by myself. And he didn't want him to do it with Rebecca? No, not after what had happened between the three of us. What happened between the three of you? I don't want to get into particulars right now, but there's something personal about doing drugs together. Your best friend and your lady ain't supposed to be cutting you out of the party. And then they waited 2 whole days to say anything. It was suspicious is all. No, I get it. Just wanted you to clarify. So when it was happening, you were already feeling upset? I mean, yeah, I guess. But I was still curious too, you know. So I forgave him when he started the ritual. When he zipped his finger along the Ziploc and delicately opened up the baggie, he took out a miniature spoon and scooped a small mound up, loading it in the narrow opening of a meth pipe. I must have looked nervous because he said, what's the matter, preacher's boy? I told him it looked like we were smoking crack or something. He said, JD's all natural. Don't you trust me? I answered with compliance. Titus put a butane torch to the side of the pipe. I watched it grow cloudy with vapors. Then I put my mouth to it and hit it as hard as I could, as many times as I could, just like I'd been told to do, until I could hear it whistling from inside my own pituitary gland. It tasted like shit, like old man balls wrapped in rubber bands and tossed into a tire fire. I mean, real disgusting, still makes me want to vomit. But I powered through it, held back the urge to blow chunks. No pain, no gain, you know. Anyway, then I fell backwards into his ripped 403 couch, watched the gold lamps tilt in on each other and make the light look like a portal, saw Titus stand up, jump into it, and disappear. Heard from the other side, follow me. When I got up, my knees locked, and I fell to the ground. Then I don't remember what happened. I woke up sometime later, feeling all kinds of gross on Titus's nasty-ass floor. I was yelling at the tops of my lungs against my will, dying is a game, dying is a game, dying is a game, and then it all went black again. So this is the last little section I'm going to read, and then I'll take questions. Robert followed an orderly into the day room at the West Oak Psychiatric Hospital, past the fake tree in the corner, through the prismatic light peeking through the blinds, and to a card table cat-a-corner to the tree, where a strange woman wearing a red pantsuit sat, who the orderly informed him was supposed to be his wife. She jumped up when she saw him and gave him a hug. She said, "Oh my God, what happened to your face?" He assumed she meant the bruises, but the question caused him to think about the first time he'd gone to the mirror at the hospital just yesterday. When he'd expected to see a round bald head, he saw instead a mop of thick black hair hanging just above a set of high chiseled cheekbones. His blue eyes were brown. His ears, which normally sported a set of zero-gauge plugs, remained unpunctured. His scraggly beard was also a thing of the past, or the non-past, or the never was, whatever you could call this confounding state of affairs. The woman in the red pantsuit grabbed his arm gently, interrupted his thoughts. "Are you okay? I've been worried sick about you. Oh, Robert, what happened?" Hearing his name startled him once more. Although the orderly had informed him earlier that morning about his truer identity, he remembered being a man named Stevie, a bartender dialetician, as he liked to call himself, seeing his central task as offering a talking cure to his hard-living and often run-down clientele. To do that, he derived his knowledge from wisdom in books held at the library for free that suckers paid thousands of dollars to read at universities. He also remembered being a man who liked to take a lot of drugs. In fact, his last memory was at his friend Titus's house, some crazy shit called JD, Titus glowing like Zeus, the Greek god himself, thunderbolts and stars coming from the palms of his hands. When people had told him JD could produce born-again experiences after he came back down, this was not what he thought they'd meant. "Do you know who I am? I'm told you're having problems with your memory." He tried to think harder. He wanted to tell her something, not because of the teary eyes that seemed longing, but because of the grimace she couldn't hide, the personal offense she'd taken to his clear lack of recognition. He continued to remain silent, figured it was his best option for the moment. "Did you take something? Like drugs?" "No." He finally spoke. Her reaction sounded more like a question to her question than an answer. He wondered if she'd noticed. He could keep denying, especially since he wasn't really sure that he had taken anything. He could have just gone crazy. Was this what they meant by crazy? How he concocted a new set of memories? All explanations were still on the table, but he wasn't planning to advertise himself as a drug user. In a hospital like this, addicts were the lowest of the low, condescended to even more than the schizos. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to accuse you. I'm just glad you're safe. I'm sorry. I wish I could figure this out, but I'm just... Oh, honey, it's okay. They were still standing. She gave him another hug. He made the red of her pantsuit maroon with his tears. After he'd collected himself, they sat down at the table. She said to him, "Everything's fine. The nurse at the front desk said they'll run a series of tests and try to figure out what happened to you. You'll probably need to be prepared to stay for at least a week. I've got Doug handling all your business. You just try to relax and get better." When she said the name Doug, a face popped into his head. A wrinkled face with the glasses. His partner, 10 years his senior, taught him everything he'd ever known about real estate. He looked back at the woman in the pantsuit. He said, "Betty? That's an encouraging sign." A film clip ran through his head, meeting her at one of his fraternity's parties in college. She was a member of their sister sorority. She still sometimes told the joke, "You know what they say when alphas and lambdas get together?" It didn't have a punchline. Oh, how it irritated him. Yes, she really was his wife. He remembered the night he proposed, fresh off landing his first big boy job out of grad school, a marketing exec at Intuitech, a software firm. He took his first paycheck to Zales and spent it all on a gigantic diamond. Did he really love her? He wondered now. Her picture was becoming clearer, but no warmth was necessarily attached to it. He remembered only that the idea of her seemed to bode well for his aspirations. A smart, attractive woman to introduce to associates had been a successful marriage on that front. But he must have loved her on some level, he thought, as memories continued to flicker like 16 millimeter. The scare when she'd been in a more traditional hospital than this one a couple of years back, from a case of pneumonia that had gotten past bad. At her worst, she was running a 106 fever, coughing and gurgling on what seemed like an infinite loop. The doctors had even prepared him for the possibility he might lose her. One of her lungs had collapsed. He had been worried to his core about her, about his daughters, about more than how it might have looked for his career. That much was true. But if he were being honest, his career was certainly one of his worries too. How would he find the time to make money if he'd have to raise his daughters by himself? It was a quite robust career, he had to admit. He thought about all he had accomplished since she'd recovered. Just last year, Forbes had ranked his and Doug's real estate firm as one of the 100 most profitable businesses in the country. They were number 67 to be exact, a modest ranking they actually preferred to one of the top spots. Because Houston, the place where they lived and did the vast majority of their business, was the biggest modest city in the country. 67 was a ranking that would play favorable to their future growth factors. The film clip stopped suddenly. His head started to throb when the instinct of number crunching collided with an inability to predict what the future might hold. He folded his arms and put his head on the table. There was this growing feeling that he had wasted his life, but he couldn't tell if the negativity were coming from himself as Robert Lanigan, or if this were part of Stevie, who was still in there somehow, fighting for his own sense of selfhood. He heard his wife speak again. "Honey, talk to me. What's going on with you? You're never this quiet." All right, so you want to know more, you have to read the rest of the book.